the top 5 things I prefer about the extended cut of Fellowship of the Ring. I'm going to do a video over each movie talking about what things I prefer about the extended cut and the theatrical cut. At number 5, we have the scene with the elves passing by Frodo and Sam. Doesn't break the pacing of the adventure at all, and also gives us a nice scene of Sam cooking that delicious food. At number 4, we have more scenes with Boromir. I'm glad we have more time in this version to see Boromir's demise really play out. Like, I think these scenes genuinely add to the arc of Boromir in a way that the theatrical cut doesn't quite expand on. Next, we have the Beren and Luthien scene. I mean, it's just beautiful. Love it. Has one of the best line readings in the whole franchise with Viggo here.
What happened to her? She died.
At number 2, we have all the extra stuff with Aragorn and Rivendell. The extended cut adds a few more lore details about Aragorn that I don't think are overbearing. There are some of those things in this movie that are overbearing. We will talk about that in the next video. But everything in Rivendell that has to do with Aragorn, I think, is pretty much all an improvement. At number 1, honestly, I'm just glad that they have Elrond doing a send-off in this version. When I think of scenes in the extended cut that I'm just baffled aren't in the theatrical version, this is probably the most simple answer I could provide, but I think that's what makes it so high on this list. Like, this feels like the small additions that you watch an extended cut for. So it's at number 1. Now, to be clear, I love everything about all of the extended cuts of these movies because you just get to have more time in this world and with these characters. But I do in many ways agree with Peter Jackson that the theatrical cuts are kind of the definitive version, and these are the additions that I think best exemplify that. At number 5, we have Bilbo's exposition dump about the Shire. Again, this is something I enjoy purely from the perspective of an extended cut, but if we're talking about what makes a movie good, especially to people that are unfamiliar with it, I think that this second exposition dump following the opening, which is just near perfection, is an example of how to bring the pace of your film to a screeching halt. This information about hobbits and the Shire is way better for a second viewing after you have already watched the theatrical cut. At number 4, we have a similar topic with the general bloat of the Shire scenes. So a lot of this stuff is very fun. I think it's also very pointless, and I think the Sackville Bagginses are probably the most dull inclusion of the whole extended edition. At number 3, we have the editing in Lothlorien. I find the editing in the extended edition of Lothlorien to be just bafflingly wonky, both on a structural level and on a moment-to-moment level. At number 2, we have the added part outside the Mines of Moria where Gandalf is mean to Pippin. In the theatrical cut, it's basically just the Fool of a Toque scene, and I think that works way better because we understand Gandalf's frustration there. However, his annoyance with Pippin at this scene just feels extremely disproportionate and off-putting for Gandalf's character. It may seem silly, but at number 1, I have the music change in the scene where we have the broken and Blade and Boromir and Aragorn. In the extended cut, there's music behind this scene, and I don't think it works really at all, as opposed to the theatrical cut where this scene is set in a very quiet, echoey place. It's way more moody.
Still sharp. No more than a broken apple. Still sharp. More than a broken apple.
Again, I know it's a very small thing to have at number 1, but I also think it represents the many subtle but pervasive ways the theatrical cut is, dare I say, just a better movie than the extended editions. Now that we've covered the Fellowship, in the next video, I will be starting with the Two Towers and talking about the things that I like from the extended edition of that. The extended editions of Lord of the Rings brought us some great things, and here are 5 of them from the Two Towers. At number 5, we have Aragorn calming down the horse. I think it does a good job of setting up the sword duel scene they have later, but also I think this is the scientifically hottest thing a man can do. I mean, just like wow. At number 4, we have Theoden saving Gamling's life. This fits under the category of things I know were cut from the movie in order to avoid an R rating, but this is an example of a change in the extended edition that I think adds a lot to Theoden's character. At number 3, we have the added scene of Éomer finding Theodred. Perhaps this was cut originally because it felt too exposition-y and maybe it felt out of place in the edit. At number 2, we have the shot of the Dunlending pledging his allegiance to Sauron. I guess this wasn't in the theatrical cut, maybe to avoid an R rating as well. But honestly, I think that this feels very integral to audiences who have no idea what this band of people LotR. In the theatrical cut, it goes directly from Uruk-hai to the meeting of these people around Saruman, and I can see that being very confusing to people that are new to these movies. This isn't at number one, but it would probably be the thing if I could put it into the theatrical cut, just like go back in time and do it. This would probably be the one little thing that I would add. But at number one, it's quite ridiculous, but it's all the added stuff with the Uruk-hai at the beginning. We get more Uruk-hai dialogue, we get more orc dialogue, we get some of their rivalry. It even makes one of the corniest lines in the whole trilogy, Punch, a little bit better.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys! Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
And while I generally think the extended cut has worse editing than the theatrical cut, this is one area where I actually find the editing to be better. Even the added bits with Merry and Pippin are better, and we will get to that in the next video. The extended cuts of Lord of the Rings brought us some great stuff, but here are 5 things from the Two Towers that I think kind of made it worse. At number 5, we have the line that Saruman gives to his right-hand man about the Forest of Fangorn.
The Forest of Fangorn lies on our doorstep. Burn it.
I just think it really detracts from that scene with Treebeard near the end. At number 4, we have a scene near the beginning that's added where Gollum actually runs off after choosing to join Frodo and Sam. This is one of the few additions in the extended cuts that I would refer to as tedious. At number 3, we have the scene between Aragorn and Éowyn with the soup. This is just kind of all of a waste of time. And yes, I am including any information about Aragorn and the Dunedain. I think there's clearly a reason that the Dunedain stuff was cut from the theatrical version, and it's because it adds absolutely nothing to the movies. At number 2, we have added jokes between all the characters. I think the theatrical cuts struck the perfect balance of humor, and I think the extended cuts foreshadow the unbearable goofiness that would make its way into the Hobbit trilogy, which, to be fair, some of the goofiness in the Hobbit trilogy I like, but I digress. The scene with Legolas and Gimli at the end, where Gimli reveals that he knows what a nervous system is probably the thing from the extended cuts that takes me out of the movie the most. And at number 1, we have the scene where Merry and Pippin find the magic water that makes them grow a little bit taller. I cannot hit the fast forward button quickly enough when this scene comes on. Just agonizingly boring and unfunny. I'm sorry if anyone out there likes that scene. You're allowed to like it. I just really don't. It's number 1 for me. In the next video, we will be talking about the Return of the King and the things that I really like from the extended cuts of that. The extended edition of Return of the King probably has the most added stuff that's worth talking about, and these to me were the top 5 best things that were added. At number 5, we have Merry offering his services to Theoden. I think this just creates a really cool parallel between these two characters who are effectively doing the same thing, just in different parts of the map. It also shows that even when you separate them, they still get into the exact same hijinks, even when the other's not there to get them into trouble. Only this time, the hijinks they get into is be honorable and fight. So at number 4, we have an easy one, the Mouth of Sauron. This character to me definitely smacks of something that was cut in order to avoid an R rating. Or maybe Jackson was just interested in getting right into the battle as soon as possible. Either way, I like the change to the emotional stakes of the final battle that the Mouth of Sauron brings with his scene. And also as a Star Wars fan, he definitely speaks to me because he's just a very memorable, creepy little guy that's on screen for like a minute.
Oh, that he suffered greatly at the hands of his hoes.
Number 3, we have all of the added scenes with Éowyn on the battlefield. I think it's great that we get to see more of her fighting prowess, whether it be with standard orcs or with the Weinstein orc. But the thing I love most about it is that Theoden is shown to watch her fight on the battlefield in this version. It's just oh so touching. As an honorable mention, we have the inspection scene, and this is an honorable mention because I 100% get why Jackson would cut this for pacing reasons, but my goodness, this is probably one of the most finished and complete scenes that were put into the extended edition. At number 2, we have Saruman and Grímr's final scene, and obviously this is something that should have been in the theatrical cut. I just totally understand why it wasn't, because this has R rating written all over it. You kind of have to remember how sensitive the movie rating system was back then. This scene could have definitely gotten in an R rating. I will 100% take this version of the scene and Saruman's ending as opposed to the theatricals.
And there Saruman must remain. Under your guard, Treebeard.
And at number 1, we have everything added with Denethor. Every added scene with Denethor, whether it be towards the beginning or the end, just makes his character more full circle. I was kind of surprised that this ended up at number 1, but in my recent watch through, I seriously looked at every one of his scenes and even his added lines, and I just can't imagine experiencing Return of the King without this much of Denethor. Join me in the final part of this series where I discuss the scenes that I can totally understand why Jackson cut for the theatrical versions. Peter Jackson has said before that the theatrical versions of Lord of the Rings are his preferred versions. So these are the top 5 things from the extended version of Return of the King that makes me go, oh, I see what you're talking about, Peter. At number 5, we have the scene with Aragorn holding the Palantir right before the final battle. It's not really a bad scene or anything. I can just totally see why Jackson would cut this for pacing reasons. I also just don't think that Aragorn dropping and breaking the necklace adds anything to the movie overall. I think it works way better exclusively as a dream like it is in the theatrical version. At number 4, we have the conversation between Éowyn and Faramir. Again, not a bad scene or anything, and something like this probably should be in there, but this just doesn't feel like a conversation that these two characters would have right now. At number 3, we have this added bit of Legolas in the Undead Mountains. I truly like 95% of the things from the extended version of Lord of the Rings, but this is part of that 5% where it's just bad. This editing, what even is that? I have an honorable mention that really does feel like a nitpick, and that's why it's not in the top 5, but it is something that's always stuck with me when I first watched the extended cut, and it's Gandalf's delivery of this line.
You're in the service of the steward now. You're going to have to do as you're told, Peregrine Took.
You're in the service of the steward now. You'll have to do as you're told, Peregrine Took.
I just think the theatrical version of it has a more jeering tone, falls a little bit more in line with what I'd expect from Gandalf, whereas in the extended cut, he kind of just sounds like an angry, impatient dad on the recliner. Again, small thing, but it's always stuck with me. I'm sure a lot of you will disagree with me on this, but at number 2, I have the This Army scene. The theatrical version is a lot better in this respect by just cutting right after the line, "What say you?" This creates a lot more build up to that reveal later, and not that this really matters, but when you watch it in 2 parts on the DVDs or Blu-rays, the first thing that happens on the second disc is the This Army scene, which is a very awkward place to enter in at. That doesn't affect its place on this list at all. It's just an observation. At number 1, we have the added Gimli humor. I can definitely see why a lot of this stuff was cut for the theatrical version. Let me be clear, Gimli is my favorite of the Fellowship, both in the movies and in the books. I'm just saying, I think there's a reason why these scenes playing behind me right now weren't in the version of the movie that won Best Picture. Thank you for joining me on this series of the extended versus theatrical cuts of Lord of the Rings. I had a lot of fun doing it. I would be very interested in a fan cut of these movies that sort of takes elements from both, that kind of thing. You know what? I'd also be interested in a cut that just adds hours more to each of these movies. Like all the stuff that was on the cutting room floor, no regard for pacing, continuity, anything like that. Maybe I just really like Lord of the Rings.